so glad you're with us right here at eradiosports.com. I'm your host, Elissa Campbell, and as promised, it is time for a recap and a regular season retrospective on the Dallas Mavericks' disappointing season. But fortunately, I'm alongside a guy that always puts a smile on my face, puts me in a good mood. I've got him on the block, I've got him posted up, and hopefully I won't throw too many elbows. It's great to be alongside the Dallas Mavericks television play-by-play announcer, Mark Followill. Welcome back, Mark.
Great to be here. No elbows, that's always a good thing. We don't want any elbows, but a lot of, I still think, intriguing things to talk about from this past season for the Mavs, for sure.
Well, let's get down to business, because I think back to the month of September when we huddled up and we previewed the upcoming season, and one of the things that you shared that really resonated with me is that throughout all your years of covering the NBA, that there's a lot of twists and turns that take place within this season. There was dynamic change that took place within this roster. What are your thoughts now, Mark? You've had about a month to kind of digest what did transpire and how the script played out.
Well, I certainly think that the most important thing that happened for Dallas happened before they ever took the floor, and that was that Dirk needed knee surgery and ended up being out longer than expected. So clearly that's the issue that set Dallas off on the wrong foot. I don't think there's any doubt about that. When your best player, and I think Dirk clearly is the best player on this team by a pretty healthy margin when he's healthy, so to speak, I think that that's going to put you in a tough spot. And so Dallas, without Dirk for 27 games and another 15 or more games to get himself anything close to right, really put them behind the 8 ball, in addition to a lot of new faces. And so rather than having that stabilizing force, being able to help usher in and make the transition easier for a lot of the new guys, it was just a complete free-for-all, complete chaos with everybody trying to figure out where they fit in, with Dirk not being that anchor and that stabilizing force. So that got him off to a bad start. I think that they did a great job of bouncing back, and they ended up doing something that no Western Conference team has done since 1981, and that is to go 10 games below 500 in a season and rally back to finish at least at 500 at 41-41. So that's something nice to be a part of. High expectations here, so they didn't end up reaching the playoffs, so that obviously leaves a bitter pill in everybody's mouth. But I think that it also spurs them to work even harder than they might have planned on. I'm sure they were going to work hard to make this thing better, but I'm sure that there's maybe even an extra gear that everybody's found in terms of motivation to get this thing on the right track back as quickly as possible.
Mark, I had an opportunity to kind of dissect and look at the schedule and some of the difficult stretches that the Dallas Mavericks went through. There was one particular stretch and challenge where they had 16 of 23 games that were on the road. That resulted in only winning 3 of 12 and 4 overtime losses. I think the one thing that really reinforces kind of what you're talking about is the value of Dirk. We saw that tangible evidence, and not only when he was missing, but of course when he's not at full capacity, it's not only his points and his production, but it is his leadership.
And he draws attention. You know, he has to be accounted for, and because of the attention that he draws, that opens up other things for other people. So I think that in the case of that particular stretch of schedule, you know, there's a saying in baseball that you can't win a pennant in April, but you can certainly lose one. And I think that over the course of an 82-game season of basketball, sometimes we have a tendency to think that, oh, well, these early games, they're not as important, but they do count in the standings. And I think that we saw this year that those games in November and December and early January are just as significant in the standings as the games in March and April. And so what happened with that really tough stretch that you're talking about, Elissa, is that the Mavs dug themselves too big of a hole to ultimately be able to dig out of. They were 13-23. Going into the final game of that stretch you're talking about, the 16 of 23 on the road, ended in Sacramento on January the 10th. They did win that game. That ended their long overtime stretch of losses, of 8 straight overtime losses, almost the NBA record, as a matter of fact. Maybe it ended up being 10 straight overtime losses. I guess they tied the record for most overtime losses consecutively. But point being is that stretch of schedule where they lost so many games, I believe 13 of 15 at one point, it did put them in too big of a hole ultimately to dig out of, despite the fact that they played much, much better. Once Dirk got into his groove after the All-Star break, the hole dug by that very, very poor stretch of the schedule proved to be just too much to overcome.
Well, the good news is that Dirk's going to be hanging out around here during the summer months. Going into next year, he will be 100%, and we certainly want to wish him a happy birthday. He's going to be 35.
He will be, yeah, very soon. Yeah, June the 19th, 1978 is when we welcomed Dirk Werner Nowitzki into the world, and the place hasn't been the same since. So we wish him happy birthday coming up soon.
In German, you say 35 Jahre alt, so that's his Geburtstag.
I'll take your word for it. You could be telling me something completely incorrect, and I wouldn't have any idea. So
very good. Well, Well, one of the positives that did take place this year was there was a number of historic milestones. And we were just talking about Dirk, 25,000 points, 9,000 rebounds. Vince Carter had his. Sean Marion appearing in his 1,000th game against Phoenix. And then head coach Rick Carlisle secured his 500th win against Portland this year. And I know as Dallas Maverick fans, they have a sincere gratitude and appreciation for what these men have contributed, not only with the Mavericks, but in the league overall.
Yeah, obviously when you reach numbers like that, that means you've been in the league for a long time, and that's what a lot of those guys will say. It's sort of how they deflect the attention away from themselves for those individual accomplishments. But Dirk realizes, and you don't see many outward displays of emotion from Dirk whenever those moments happen in his career. But if you watch that game in New Orleans, the next to last game of the season, game 80 of the year, Dirk smiled, looked back at the bench. The bench knew he was getting to 25,000. Dirk knew the bucket when it happened. So there was certainly a sense of pride in that. He actually said something on Twitter after the fact, too, about all the thanks for the support and what everybody had to say to him about the 25,000 points. So that was great. I don't think Rick Carlisle had a whole lot of interest in talking about the 500 wins. I think the happiest thing about it for him was that it happened and it was in the past and he didn't have to address it anymore. The next thing up for him, by the way, is passing a guy that he played for. Casey Jones is just a few wins ahead of Rick on the all-time coaching victory list. So that's something that will happen early on next year. Sean Marion, as you noted, 1,000 games, 9,000 rebounds. He's about to move into the top 40 in the rebounding list. Vince Carter passed names like Hal Greer, Larry Bird, Gary Payton, Clyde Drexler on the all-time scoring list. I think he certainly has an appreciation for that, and that really puts him into Hall of Fame territory. There isn't a single player in the league that scored at least 21,000 points. That's everybody that's eligible to be in the Hall of Fame that's achieved that mark has made it to the Hall of Fame. And so the fact that Vince late in the season passed 22,000 and will probably pass 23,000 and maybe a little bit more after that, you know, get somewhere between 23 and 24 sometime early on, or late next season. And you know, I don't know what his plans are for his career after that when his contract runs out after next season, but clearly he's going to be in Hall of Fame territory with the numbers that he continued to add to his resume this year and will continue to do so next year.
Mark, I'd like to continue to talk about some of the positives, and I thought that Vince Carter really was spot on in his exit interview. He talked about that, how he felt that after the All-Star break, this is when the team really started to stride out. They started to trust each other more. The team chemistry evolved. They were sharing the basketball more. Did you see that?
Sure, absolutely I did. Yeah, I thought, look, everything that they did after the All-Star break was very positive. They won games, and forgive me for not off the top of my head, I don't remember the record, but they won games after the All-Star break at a rate that would reflect, if you extrapolated out over the full 82-game season, they were on a pace to be a 50-win team post-All-Star break, and they were on a pace to be a high 40s win team if you looked at what they did from whenever things started to turn in the right direction January 10th on. The numbers with Dirk as a starter also were the pace of a high 40-win team, 48, 49 wins over the course of the regular season. So they did a lot of things well when Dirk was healthy, and when they especially got after the All-Star break. They started to beat a lot more good teams, to win games against high-caliber teams, like, you know, they had that home win against the Clippers. They had that great win against the Chicago Bulls. You know, they were able to beat Denver in overtime, so they were able to beat some of those caliber of teams that they really couldn't hold a candle to early in the season. So there were a lot of positives that happened after the All-Star break, and I would say that Vince's assessment is spot on, and I think he was a big part of it. Look, Vince had a great year this year. I voted him third in the Sixth Man of the Year voting. I was the only person who did that. I thought clearly J.R. Smith and Jamal Crawford were the top two guys. Nobody else saw it my way, but Vince was 7th in the league this year in points per game off the bench. He was tied for the league lead in three-pointers made off the bench. He led the team in plus-minus. He led the team from not just that statistical plus-minus standpoint, but from a leadership standpoint. He defended. He drew charges. He did a lot of things that I thought were worthy of being. He embraced the sixth man role. I thought he did a lot of things that were worthy of getting a little bit of recognition for what he meant to the team. And his assessment, like I said, of what the Mavericks did after the All-Star break, I would agree with that 100%.
Vince Carter, certainly a very special guy, but I think one of the things that was very special about this particular team is the flexibility that they had with the number of rotations and the depth. You look at the bench production, a league-leading 42 points per game, and they scored 60 points 3 times. That is certainly nice to have. Well,
Rick has really preached this philosophy in his time here, 5 seasons now in Dallas, and he's believed that the way the league is now, you really have to build your team in a strength in numbers approach. So the roster is assembled with the hopes of being deep and having a lot of different guys being able to contribute. He tells them everybody has to stay ready. It doesn't matter if you're in or out of the rotation, if you're the 14th guy on the roster or whatever. You're one injury, you're one night of foul trouble, you're one situation away from being pressed into minutes and a role that maybe you haven't been used to having over the recent weeks leading up to it. So he stresses the be ready thing, and I think that by and large part, most everyone over the course of 5 years that Rick Carlisle has been here has bought into that. This year was no different. They did have the strength in numbers approach. They didn't necessarily start their best 5 guys game in, game out, because Rick also had a philosophy that over the course of 48 minutes, they wanted to set up their rotation and set up their lineup where they could have an evened out attack over those 48 minutes. And it worked on a lot of nights, especially in the second half of the season.